Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the 12th instalment of Doctor Who, the classic series Action Figures: A History. In today's episode, we're going to be continuing to take a look at the 50th anniversary releases of 2013, continuing to showcase the Toys R Us exclusive Doctor and Dalek 2-packs, featuring the 8th Doctor and Dalek Alpha from the 8th Doctor comics, the 3rd Doctor and Clear Dalek from Planet of the Daleks, and the 4th Doctor and one of the first ever Daleks from Genesis of the Daleks. In the least dramatic way possible, the end is nigh for this series, as this episode also showcases some of the final ever figure releases as a part of the Forbidden Planet exclusive series, with the Daemons collector set and the Claws of Axos collector set, featuring further variants of the Brigadier after his original debut within the Three Doctors collector set, a further variant of Joe Grant, as well as Roger Delgado as the Magister from the Daemons, and of course, not to forget, one of the final ever classic series brand new sculpts, being the Bok. So sit back and I hope you enjoy the 12th ever episode of Doctor Who, the classic series Action Figures: A History. So now we hop back to the world of Toys R Us, where we take a look at some further Doctor Dalek 2-pack exclusive releases. Now, of course, in episode 11, we did take a look at the 2nd, 6th, 5th and 7th Doctor releases. However, in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at some of the more exciting collector sets released with the 1st, 3rd, 8th and 4th Doctors. These sets were in fact rather sought after by collectors, as they had some rather stark changes compared to their Forbidden Planet exclusive counterparts, and as a result do in fact fetch a rather high price many years later. Starting off with the 1st Doctor and Dalek Supreme from the Daleks Master Plan. Now, this is the first set that I did in fact pick up of the 50th anniversary releases, after the previous ones for some reason not catching my attention, and I really regret not getting them in fact, especially the 5th Doctor one and the 7th Doctor one, because naturally it is one of the only few sets that I do not own. However, this set is equally just as nice and features another nice variation of 60s Dalek. So briefly taking a look at the 1st Doctor figure, this is in fact the closest re-release that we've ever got in the series to the original SDCC 2009 1st Doctor figure that was of course released alongside the Saucer Commander Dalek from the Dalek Invasion of Earth, and this is a really lovely figure. However, he doesn't come packaged with his walking stick, therefore I always kind of resort to having him almost cupping his hands in a very unusual manner, but I think it works quite well. The likeness to Hartnell has seen a little bit of a revision. It is exactly the same, however the skin has in fact seen a little bit of an upgrade. It's now a little bit more of a warmer orangey colour compared to the original paler version. We do still have the pink around the eyes, which I suppose is okay, and also the wig has of course also seen a little bit of a revision, just bringing on the original 2009 version. You may be able to see a slight difference in the paint application. It's not really too much, it's a very subtle change, however I think that both of them are nice in their own way. Taking a look at the actual costume itself, once again very similar to the original version. We just have your standard sculpt. The jacket does seem to be a little bit more glossy compared to the original version of the figure. We do also have the inclusion of the waistcoat in the very middle, which once again seems to be exactly the same. However, the cravat is now a much more of a vibrantish blue colour, as opposed to the more darker black design of the original. And moving down to the trousers, which is similar checkered design. However, the grey colour underneath is now a little bit of a lighter grey colour compared to the original. And then we finish off the figure with of course the darker brown shoes and the lighter brown spats. Dalek figure of the set, which was admittedly the main reason why I bought this set back in the day, simply because it is so strikingly different to the other 60s Daleks with the smaller thin fender. This time round we do have your regular 60s colour scheme, however the majority of it is now black as opposed to your regular silver. So the Dalek does of course keep its regular 60s smaller fender, and the actual skirt piece is exactly the same sculpt to any other classic series Dalek. However, it rather unusually has a black base colour, looking very much like the Saucer Commander pilot from SDCC 2009. However, this time round the blue hemispheres are a much darker blue colour, as opposed to the baby blue of the other 1960s First Doctor Daleks, which is a very nice touch. Moving up to the middle section, this is exactly the same to other Daleks really. usually, having your regular mesh design that has been coated in a paint tap. We also have the inclusion of your regular 60s gun sculpt along with the manipulator arm. Barrel section is exactly the same to usual, and at the very top we have the inclusion of the dome, been painted in matte black, and we have the inclusion of the more up-to-date 60s ear bulbs this time round, have been sculpted out of a yellow transparent plastic and are much more bigger and cone-shaped, and were first seen on the Power of the Daleks sound effects Dalek from the sound effects range Wave 1, which is once again nice to see those featured. Then of course the eye stalk has also seen a little bit of an upgrade this time round, having a black base colour at the bottom, darker blue dishes around the side of the eye stalk to match with the hemispheres on the skirt, and the iris itself has been painted a black with of course your standard white pupil in the middle. Overall, I think that this set was certainly a very nice one and a great opportunity for those people who didn't get the original First Doctor to add one to their collection. And of course the Dalek itself, I absolutely adore the 60s colour scheme, so this was one that was an expected variant to occur within the line at some point, and will of course look brilliant alongside the other Daleks from the 60s. Released around the same time as the First Doctor and Supreme Dalek from the Daleks Master Plan, we have the Fourth Doctor and Genesis Dalek from the Fourth Doctor story, Genesis of the Daleks, surprisingly enough. Now this is once again a Toys R Us exclusive in celebration of the 50th anniversary. The Fourth Doctor from this set is of course a direct reuse of the Fourth Doctor that came as a part of the Forbidden Planet exclusive Sontaran experiment set that also featured a Sontaran space pod along with the Field Major Steyer figure, which I have previously covered as a part of this series. However, it does feature a few paint upgrades. The Dalek in this set is also rather similar to the one as seen within the Sound Effects Daleks range, Wave 2. The Fourth Doctor within this set does of course feature your more serious and hatted head sculpt, and this time round the paint application does make him look rather miffed indeed, and very unusually this figure does have some rather purpley looking lips. Moving further down the costume, of course this is the standard duffel coat sculpt, so we do also have the inclusion of the reddish orangey tie underneath along the yellowy waistcoat, along with the standard Wave 1 scarf. Moving further down the figure we have the inclusion of the lighter grey trousers, however most notably, and a difference from the Sontaran experiment figure, arguably the most noticeable difference of this figure altogether, is in fact the inclusion of this muddied design on the trousers. We just have a few splatters and things on there, which wasn't included on the original version, which although I don't know if this is accurate to what is seen throughout the actual story, is still I suppose a nice variation from the original version. The Fourth Doctor does also come packaged with a rather unique accessory. It is of course a Dalek gun, because the Dalek in this set doesn't in fact have a gun. Regular ball joint that a Dalek would have that is normally in fact embedded within the casing, and then we have your regular sculpt of a Dalek gun which has been painted a coppery colour. Genesis Dalek of the set, really looking back, isn't that exciting, and probably 13-year-old me in fact bought this set simply down to the fact that he no longer has the gun and the Fourth Doctor is holding the gun instead. Therefore the figure does look visually a little bit different to all of the others. The fender of the Dalek is the one that is split into two separate sections, both of which have been painted a glossy black colour, and the rest of the body is naturally exactly the same to any other Genesis Dalek, being a rather murky dark grey. The hemispheres have been painted glossy black, making them stand out, and the midsection is your usual sculpt as per ever really, including the mesh design that's been given this time round a rather lovely looking silver highlight on the mesh sections, making the slats stand out. At the opposite side we have the inclusion of the manipulator arm, which is exactly the same to usual with the same paint taps. However, of course, we have the absence of the gun at the opposite side, which on the inside of the casing itself, a little box has been included, kind of case off the inside section of the Dalek to just make the inside of here look black. Now, if you so wish, you can kind of put the gun and sit it within the hole. However, it doesn't go all the way in. Well, it can go all the way in if you wish to force it, so you can make this Dalek look like a regular one, just with the gun slightly more popped out of the ball joint than usual. When zoomed out, I think that this certainly does look the part. However, as I say, the gun can't exactly move too much. It's almost just sat within the joint. And I do not recommend pushing it all the way in, because I did that and it was very difficult to get back out. Top half of the Dalek, there isn't really too much to talk about. We do have some nice paint taps on the eye stalk section, including the pupil, as well as the lighter blue dishes around the side. The dome is exactly the same colour to the rest of the body. However, this time round, the ear bulbs have been sculpted in whitish plastic, which does stand out quite a lot. And this is, of course, the more modern, ridged design that did come in with the Resurrection of the Dalek set. I would say that this set does probably appeal more so to the collectors than the regular Doctor Who fan who just wants a Dalek to add to their collection. However, I think it's rather cool to be able to have one of the first ever Daleks in Doctor Who history within action figure form, because of course this is one of the first ever Daleks that Davros did tests on within the very early half of Genesis of the Daleks. Of course, this set was originally intended to in fact be a different set altogether, featuring a Destiny of the Daleks lighter grey Dalek, alongside presumably a Destiny of the Daleks 4th Doctor. However, of course, that plan was obviously later changed. The next Toys R Us exclusive Dr. Dalek collector set is the 3rd Doctor from Planet of the Daleks, alongside a Dalek that caught everybody's attention. This is one of 2 sets that were incredibly popular back when the 50th anniversary sets were released, as this Dalek isn't just any Dalek, it is of course a clear Dalek from Planet of the Daleks, having been experimented on to have invisibility, very much like the Spyridans as seen within the story. However, although the popularity of this set was incredibly high, rather unusually the 3rd Doctor figure packaged within this set is probably the least accurate 3rd Doctor figure, or any figure in fact released as a part of the classic series so far, and is a sign of things to come, certainly within the B&M exclusive line of classic series action figures, as of course the jacket or blazer that the 3rd Doctor does wear in Planet of the Daleks is very different to the one as seen on your regular 3rd Doctor figure. It does of course stretch all the way around to the side and certainly doesn't feature the cravat section. However, they have of course just used the rather standard 3rd Doctor sculpt, which I think does in fact look okay. It looks like a perfectly nice figure. Figure does in fact sport a really nice likeness to John Pertwee with some really sharp and precise paint apps, and then of course the costume itself is a really lovely purple colour palette. So we have this lighter purple section in the very middle with a rather lovely looking lime cravat there, and then the rest of the blazer has been painted in your rather purpley design with the lighter purple frills coming out of the bottom. As per usual, the hands have been sculpted, one in an open palm position and the other to hold a sonic screwdriver that the figure does not come with, and the rest of the body is basically just your usual 3rd Doctor legs with of course the light brown shoes at the very bottom. So although inaccurate, this is still a nice figure to add to the collection, certainly an eye-catching variant of the 3rd Doctor. Now taking a look at the Dalek of the set, when stripping this figure down to its basics, it is exactly the same sculpt to any other Dalek. It's just the type of plastic that has been used that makes this Dalek so strikingly different. Of course, the vast majority of the figure is basically a clear Dalek, so you can see on the inside ever so slightly. However, thankfully, even the clear plastic has been given almost a frosted effect in order to hide some of the inner structure, which is much appreciated. I think that certainly makes the figure look a lot better than it would do if it was just a clear plastic. So that does of course even include the eye stalk manipulator arm as well as the gun, all printed in a clear plastic. And then of course we tilt the figure around to the side where we have this lovely black design which has been sprayed. Of course the 3rd Doctor does spray the Dalek with a chemical, and then that of course reveals it within one of the episodes, I think part 1 in fact, of Planet of the Daleks, where we have that brilliant cliffhanger. Now this is a really lovely design. Of course we start off with a rather thick black and then it blends into the Dalek and we have a spread design around the side. One of those unusual cases for Dalek figures where it is such a precise variant, it can only be used for this moment specifically within Planet of the Daleks. I do quite like the nicheness of this Dalek. I think it's a very intriguing design and certainly one that can sit on the shelf and look different from all of the other Daleks on display, even though in theory the sculpt is exactly the same. As I mentioned when I first started talking about this set, this is without a doubt one of the more popular sets released as a part of the 50th Toys R Us series, and if you get the opportunity to get it for a decent price, then I certainly recommend doing so because it features a nice variant of the 3rd Doctor, along with a very unique Dalek design. The 8th and final set released as a part of the 50th anniversary Toys R Us series is one that fails to disappoint. A big question of this line since its very beginning was if we are seeing all of the Doctors alongside a Dalek, what on earth are they going to do with the 8th Doctor, who only of course had one, by this point, television appearance? So there was a big question mark. Were they going to do something from Big Finish? Were they going to do something different altogether? Were they just going to package him alongside a 2005 Bronze Dalek? We kind of knew that something exciting was going to happen, and character options failed to disappoint, as we have the classic series' line, first ever delve into the comic book universe, as we have Dalek Alpha from the 8th Doctor comic, Children of the Revolution. So we have a standard 1960s Dalek repainted with a red, black and silver colour scheme, alongside the 8th Doctor figure, once again repainted for the first ever time since its release within the 11 Doctors set, this time round with a comic book colour scheme. So firstly, taking a look at the 8th Doctor figure, of course he is the second incarnation of the Doctor to receive a external non-TV appearance costume, the first of which being the 6th Doctor with the SDCC 2009 real-time variation of his costume. So the sculpting of the entire figure is exactly the same to the original. We have the head, which is a rather lovely likeness to Paul McGann. However, we do still have those very unusual pinkish red rings around his eyes, which do kind of make him look either possessed, ill, or like he's been poisoned. It's one of the three. And then we do also have the inclusion of the hair, which has been given a rather darker paint application this time round. The same design is once again prominent, with some really lovely details of the curls, especially around the side. However, of course, the main attraction is the actual costume, which has been completely upgraded. This time round, the coat is of course a light blue design, with the inclusion of some darker blue, almost blackish buttons in the very middle. The waistcoat has now been repainted a light brown colour, with the inclusion of the silver chain around the side. We do still have the inclusion of a white shirt, however the cravat has been painted from a light grey to a yellowy greenish colour, which then of course towards the very bottom of the costume, the darker grey trousers have now been replaced by a lighter brown design, to finish with some glossy black shoes at the very bottom. And of course, naturally, due to us only having one version of the 8th Doctor within the figure line so far, it is nice to see another variation of his costume, and more importantly, another figure to add to the 8th Doctor era on the shelf. And then of course we move on to the final Dalek of the series, which is Dalek Alpha, which at the end of the day is once again exactly the same sculpt to any other 60s Dalek. However, much like the 3rd Doctor, Spyridon Dalek, it has received a major colour palette overhaul. So the fender of the Dalek has been painted a glossy black, and as per usual has been split into its two sections, and the skirt of the Dalek along with the rest of the body has been painted this rather lovely looking red. The hemispheres on the skirt have been given a rather glossy black paint application, and the midpoint does of course feature your regular mesh palette design, including the slats which have been painted silver, your standard 60s gun weaponry, and the standard manipulator arm. The barrel section is exactly the same to usual, and then of course at the very top we have the inclusion of the dome, which once again has been painted red, along with the original traditional 60s spherical ear domes, which have been sculpted in a transparent clear plastic. Of course, the eye stalk itself has also seen a little bit of an unusual and unique revision, where we have a black base colour along some black dishes around the middle, black end section along with the iris in the middle, and the rest of this silver design. Another rather unique inclusion for this Dalek is that the iris at the very tip isn't in fact painted a white and a black pupil, but it has the inclusion of a silver background and then the black pupil on top of this, which once again I do believe is a first for a classic series Dalek. Then of course the thing that distinguishes this Dalek from any other red Dalek within Doctor Who history, of course on the opposite side of the dome we have the inclusion of the A. This is a very simple inclusion and has just been painted on with sharp silver paint app, and is of course the symbol for Alpha as opposed to just a standard regular A. So overall, for the 8th Doctor comic book variation alongside Dalek Alpha, this is an absolutely gorgeous set. I really do love it. If you are a fan of the 8th Doctor, then this is a perfect set for you. And the one thing that I do not like about this set is actually not the set itself, but the fact that we didn't get to see any other comic book Daleks after the release of this set. I do believe due to him being called Alpha, there would have been a Dalek called Beta and Delta as well, I think. I'm not very good with that area of science, but it would have been lovely to see those Daleks released at some point, maybe even a part of the B&M exclusive range. I might see those Daleks released. But naturally, if you get the opportunity to buy this set, I highly recommend doing so because it's gorgeous. The 8th Doctor is a lovely variant, and of course, it's a red Classic Series Dalek, very unique and stands out so much on display. And with that, that does of course conclude my look at the Doctor Dalek 2-packs that were Toys R Us exclusives in celebration of Doctor Who's 50th anniversary. Overall, I thought that this was a really lovely collection of Doctor and Dalek variants. I thought that we got to see some rather great variants of the 3rd and 5th Doctors in particular, as well as a rather experimental variation of the 8th Doctor that previously, up until this point, had only been released as a part of the 11 Doctors collector set. Now, as I mentioned within episode 11, I will not be taking a look at the new series Daleks released as a part of this series, because after all, this is a series focused around Classic Series Doctors. However, this collection did also see some welcome re-releases of the new sculpt bronze Daleks, along with, of course, a slightly less vibrant version of Blue Paradigm Dalek. Now, of course, one of the most exciting things to come out of Doctor Who's 50th anniversary special, being the Day of the Doctor, was the unknown mysterious incarnation of the Doctor, referred to as the War Doctor, as portrayed by John Hurt, or as the action figure was referred to, the Other Doctor. Now, the Other Doctor, of course, isn't a part of Classic Series Doctor Who. I suppose you could argue all day if John Hurt belongs to either New Series or Classic Series. For me personally, I think he is a bridge between Classic Series and New Series, but ultimately is a New Series incarnation of the Doctor because he was thought up within the New Series of Doctor Who. He isn't the interest for this video. I am of course referring to this little object instead, which is Paul McGann's head. Here is something I bet you never thought you would be watching today. It is Paul McGann's head resting on top of the Moment. Now, I would put this on the War Doctor's body because after all, this is a swappable head. However, quite frankly, it doesn't feel right, because this figure comes packaged with a War Doctor figure that is of course the War Doctor in his War Doctor outfit, as he naturally would be. And Paul McGann never wore the War Doctor's outfit, because when the 8th Doctor regenerated, he was in his own outfit. Therefore, the whole concept of this head to start with being packaged with the War Doctor is a little bit unusual. However, I need to cover it as a part of this series, because Paul McGann is the 8th Doctor, and the 8th Doctor is a Classic Series Doctor. Therefore, at the end of it, to put it very literally, this is a part of a Classic Series action figure, albeit a very small part of it, i.e. just a head. Rather brilliantly, this is a whole new sculpt. We have never seen this sculpt actually given to a body. It was only available with the original War Doctor figure, and it is pretty much a Dark Eyes 8th Doctor. Arguably, some may say the paint application on this head is actually better than the one that we ultimately got with the Night of the Doctor 8th Doctor as a part of the 5.5 Collector series. It's a nice sculpt. It has a few decent details. It definitely looks like Paul McGann. A nice paint application around the eyes and the eyebrows, and we also have a little bit of a strand of hair coming down the side of the forehead as well. However, of course, he doesn't belong with the War Doctor's body, and never will, so you can kind of sit on the shelf being bodiless for the rest of eternity. However, hopefully, maybe one day you could swap it with the B&M exclusive Dark Eyes 8th Doctor to kind of give it a little bit of a home, but for now, he's a head with no home. The early months of 2014 seen the release of another Forbidden Planet exclusive collector set, in fact starting off the year in a very similar manner to 2013 with another variant of the Brigadier alongside Joe Grant, this time round from the Claws of Axos. Now this set was originally announced, in fact I do believe around the midpoint of 2013, and as you can see it took quite a while for this set to be released, having been released in the early half of 2014, and at this point in collecting the Classic Series line, I can remember it raising quite a lot of alarm bells as to why the production of these action figures was taking so long, especially having just experienced the 50th anniversary. Surely action figures should be on a high. However, we soon found out after the release of these early 2014 sets that perhaps the Classic Series line was nearing its end. So taking a look first at the Brigadier as portrayed by Nicholas Courtney, time round in his woolen jumper as opposed to his full professional uniform. And I do like both of these variants for their own reasons. I really like how professional the Three Doctors variation of the Brigadier looks. I kind of like how relaxed this version of the Brigadier is as well. And of course this figure does see a slight retool to the head sculpt. Of course, the woolen jumper is a really lovely texture. As you can see, it almost has a pinstripe detailed into the sculpt itself. Across the middle of this, we do have the inclusion of the belt, which also features a golden pen tap, and we do also have the inclusion of the gun holster, very much like on the original Brigadier figure. Tilting the figure around to the sides, we also have some inclusions of the shoulder pads at the very top, as well as the elbow pads, which have been painted a slightly lighter green colour. And at the top of the shoulders, we have the inclusion of a few little badges that have been given a nice golden highlight. Bottom half of the figure, this is in fact exactly the same to the previous version, featuring exactly the same sculpt, a darker green colour, and of course the brown shoes at the very bottom. Much like the previous figure released in the Three Doctors set, I think that the likeness of this sculpt is in fact rather impressive, featuring a lot of sharp paint taps. I love the inclusion of the moustache in the middle, as well as the rather sharp detailing on the eyes. This time round, of course, the major change in detail is the inclusion of the beret, as opposed to the regular, more professional looking hat seen on the Three Doctors release. Rather nicely, this does have the inclusion of the 70s unit logo, has been rather sharply printed on, and then of course the rest of the beret has also been painted a basic beige colour. And of course, much like the previous release, no Brigadier figure would be complete without his gun accessory. Of course, following the trend of the other classic series companions, once you get one companion figure, you get the same character in a number of different costumes. This time round we have a rather strikingly different variation of Jo Grant in her costume from the Claws of Axos, which is a visibly different variant in pretty much a completely different costume, which is nice to see over just a regular repaint release. As lovely as it is to see a brand new sculpt, I can't lie, in my own opinion, I think this costume is incredibly ugly. Of course, it has a rather purpley pink colour scheme, and then we have this almost woolen cardigan jumper piece added over the top with a few bits of detailing on, including the rather large collar with the inclusion of a bear badge on or something like that, and then we have a few buttons down the middle, as well as those very puffy cuff sections there at the very bottom. As per usual, there is a few detailing on the hands, including the addition of the ring on each individual finger, which have been given a silver paint application. And the actual cardigan piece itself, or jumper, whatever you want to call it, has been given a green wash over the top, which is incredibly murky indeed. It kind of looks like she's been rolling about in mud or a grass field, which I'm pretty sure she didn't do throughout the Claws of Axos. Moving further down the figure, we have the inclusion of a more pleasant looking skirt piece, purpley pink colour, and the rest of the figure is exactly the same sculpt to the original version. However, this time round the high heels are painted in a purple colour, or a purpley pink once again, as opposed to the darker blue on the Three Doctors set. Something that I never noticed about this Jo Grant figure back in the day is that the head is in fact an ever so slightly different sculpt. It's kind of around the same thing as the Caves of Androzani Perry, where I never quite realised it back in the day, simply because I don't expect character options to make a sculpt that virtually looks exactly the same to the one they've already made, however just with a slight difference. However, bringing in the Three Doctors Jo Grant, as you can see, this version is incredibly smiley and almost creepy. However, this version is a little bit more miserable. However, I think that the paint application over the top of it makes the figure generally just look like a more normal resting face, which over the creepy Three Doctors Jo Grant. As you can see, we have the paint application on the eyes, which once again are rather sharp and impressive, and certainly have quite a lot of life. And then, much like the previous version, sculpt on the hair, which has been given lots of nice details, including a wash over the top to bring out the different strands. And to be honest, out of the two, I like this head sculpt more. The third and final figure of the set is a Axon male, of course the second variation of Axon that we have seen within the classic series line, the first of which being released alongside the Roger Delgado Master, and it was of course the Axon monster creature. This one is a lot more normal in its humanoid approach, I suppose, having hands as well as a head, as opposed to just being a ball of mutant red stuff with tendrils coming off it. Now, upon closer inspection, you may in fact recognise the base body that has been used on this figure, because it is of course Sharaz Jek from the Caves of Androzani set. However, the body that was used on Sharaz Jek was entirely black. This time round, it has been painted entirely cream, with this golden highlight added over the top, and to be honest, it works really well. I think this is a perfect example of a reuse sculpt done right, and it certainly does the job. Of this golden design that has been applied that does also follow all the way throughout the entirety of the figure's body, down to the very simple feet there at the very bottom. Of course, the hands of the figure are pretty much a Doctor design, I in fact think, because that looks like a sonic screwdriver holding hand. However, it has been painted entirely in a golden colour. And then of course towards the top of the figure we have the inclusion of the axon head. Now, this is of course a brand new sculpt because the axons do look very different to any other classic series Doctor Who villain, and very eerie because they're just a head with not really much emotion in there whatsoever. You do have a little bit of a wash that has been applied over the hair, once again to bring out those details of the different curls and things like that, and that does stretch all the way around to the back of the head as well. And then the actual facial expression is basically just a standard glum face design with little to no emotion whatsoever, which I think works pretty well. And that's really it for the Claws of Axos set. It's an okay set, I suppose. Out of all of the classic series sets that have been released, I think that the Claws of Axos one is probably one of the more common ones. I recall that some of the stock may have in fact been sold to Amazon after it being a Forbidden Planet exclusive release because they had quite a lot of stock left over. Therefore, this set I think is one that is quite easy to come by for around the recommended retail price of £35. However, I think it may have sold out in fact from Amazon by this point. However, it will be still available from other third-party retailers such as eBay. The Brigadier is a nice variant. Of course, it's nice to also have another Joe Grant, and it's brilliant to have another variation of Axon to add to the Third Doctor shelf. However, overall, it's not really got anything too attention-grabbing. After waiting many months for the release of this set, it was finally nice to see it and be able to add it to the shelf alongside another Third Doctor set, which was of course the Damon's collector set. That is arguably a little bit more exciting than this one. And here we go, after many collector sets, many variants, many exciting action figures, here we have the final Forbidden Planet exclusive collector set Doctor Who product to feature multiple classic series figures as opposed to just single carded releases. It is another Third Doctor story, this time round a set dedicated to the Damons, featuring the third ever variant of the Brigadier, alongside another variant of Roger Delgado that is strikingly different to the previous version, and the box statue creature. Now, this set was released around at the same time, if not exactly the same time, as the Claws of Axos set, which was rather unusual for the classic series, especially considering that both sets feature a very similar looking Brigadier action figure. You often found that that was the funny thing with the classic series line of Doctor Who action figures. You would spend so many years wishing that they would release a certain character, and then all of a sudden they would, and then once you get one variation, you end up getting 3 or 4 or maybe even more. So here we have the third variation of the Brigadier, which basically combines both of the previously released figures in the same figure at once. So we have of course the main body of this figure that does in turn also use the legs from this original version, and then of course use the head from the Three Doctors Brigadier on of course the body of this one. So it's an amalgamation of all of the parts that we've seen so far. So there's not really too much to say. Exactly the same detail as the previous version, a really lovely woolen texture. We have the gun holster, and we also have the belt around the middle. The figure is once again wearing gloves, much like the previous version, and we do also have the inclusion of the darker green legs, along with the brown trousers at the very bottom. And there is also the detailing of badges and the emblems on the shoulders, and the same detailing is also repeated on the back of the figure as well. And naturally, much like the other two Brigadier figures, it does share a rather nice likeness to Nicholas Courtney, with some rather sharp paint apps. To make the figure stand out a little bit more on display, thankfully this version of the Brigadier does come with 2 exclusive accessories, being the inclusion of binoculars that have been given a silver paint app, as well as the inclusion of a rather standard looking cane with also a silver paint app at the tip, and makes this costume of the Brigadier look ever so slightly different. The next figure of the set is of course Bok the statue, and it always makes me laugh looking back that out of all of the figures that we've seen, from the amazing Dalek variants to the brilliant Cybermen to the many monsters and villains to the different variations of Doctors and Masters, it all comes down to this. The final ever completely brand new sculpt that we have within the Classic Series line, Bok. Out of all the figures to end on within 50 plus years of Doctor Who, it ends on a little gargoyle with his tongue out. Absolutely perfect. And that said, the Bok sculpt is in fact rather impressive. I really do love the likeness. As you can see, we have the suggestion of the nose and the eyes that have been highlighted by an ever so slight black paint tap around the edges, and we do also have the inclusion of the little antennae devil horns at the very top there as well, including of course those rather pointed ears. The rest of the body has been given, as you would expect, a stone texture, much like that of say Weeping Angel. However, it has been given a much more natural design with not really too much detailing on whatsoever that stands out. However, a subtle black wash that has been added over the top. There is also the inclusion of the little forefingers and the thumb on of course each hand. Have the legs, which have been once again sculpted in a squatted position and have been given the same stone texture with a few stipples on, and then of course we have those very unusual almost duck feet at the very bottom, which have been given the webbed design. Taking a look at the back, we do have his little devil tail, which has been made out of a flexible PVC, which arguably actually gives the figure quite a bit of stability, as well as features a lot of nice detail. And then of course on the very back we have the inclusion of his little wings, which also have some nice detailing on there. However, these don't move, unlike a Weeping Angel. They are flexible PVC, so you can get them to physically move. However, they aren't posable or anything like that. However, it's still a nice inclusion, and considering that this is a rather small figure compared to at least all the other figures within the range, it does have a fair amount of detail and looks really cool on display. It's just a shame that we don't have a Zal to go next to him. And just out of interest, since he is a little bit smaller than all of the other figures, here is a size comparison alongside Katie Manning's Jo Grant, and of course a regular third Doctor figure. See, he's very small. He'll probably have a very crap weekend at Alton Towers. The third and final figure of the set is of course a variation on Roger Delgado's Master, this time round the Master as the Magister, as seen throughout the story, which in fact uses exactly the same base figure as the original Roger Delgado Master, however has seen this PVC casing added over the top to make it look like a completely different variation of his incarnation, and to be honest, it works really well. But for the most part, the robe does in fact feature your standard material detailing, as well as the subtle detailing of a few squares and pattern designs added over this. Of course, as we get to the top, we do have more further details of course, the Magister collared section, including lots of different bits of writing, as well as a few golden highlights, including around the trim of the collar itself, and of course the necklace in the very middle. Some white triangles added on the upper half of the arm section. The very back of the figure, once again, pretty much exactly the same design, however, this time round lacking in this upper half section of a further collar piece with more detailing on. This time we just have the patterning of the actual robe itself, with a few more squares that have been brought out by a slightly lighter red highlight. And as I mentioned earlier, the figure underneath this is in fact exactly the same to your regular Master. As you can see, he's just got your regular black costume underneath, which has been given of course that white highlight on the bottom of the cuffs. Taking a look at the likeness now, of course this does sport an impressive likeness to Roger Delgado, and does feature exactly the same sculpt to the previous two releases. However, this time round the skin tone does seem to be ever so slightly paler than the original version, and some of the detailing around the goatee as well as on the hair does seem to be not as sharp as the original version. Some of the grey highlights on the lower half of the beard do seem to be a little bit more toned down, and the same does also apply for the hair as well. It seems to be a little bit darker than the original version. However, the sharp paint taps on the eyebrows as well as the very piercing eyes do once again continue from the original release. I think that the Demons set does suffer for where it comes within the production line of the classic series of action figures. Had this set been released a year or so earlier, I would have imagined this set to maybe feature a Zal, and if it did feature a Zal, it would be a lot more exciting, and it kind of feels unusual that he hasn't been included, due to him being pretty much the most integral part of the Demons as an actual story, and yet he's not a part of the set. Of course, the variation of Roger Delgado's Master is really welcome, considering that all the other figures that have been released are exactly the same base figure, so it's nice to have some variation in there. Bok, of course, is a welcome final new figure to the collection, and of course the Brigadier is a decent enough variant, however not so exciting if you've got the previous ones. So with that does of course conclude the 12th episode of Doctor Who, the classic series action figures a history. I really hope you have enjoyed it. In case you haven't already, please do check out the previous episodes as a part of this series, taking a look at each and every Doctor Who classic series action figure since the very beginning of the line back in 2008. Do of course join me in the 13th instalment of this series as we take a look at more classic series Doctor Who action figures, including the return of the Sound Effects Daleks range with Wave 2, another variant of Ace, this time round from Silver Nemesis, and of course the 13 Doctors collector set, a rather exciting release and pretty much marking the end of the general release of classic series Doctor Who action figures, as from the 14th part onwards of this series we will of course be taking a look at pretty much the final leg of classic series Doctor Who action figures, turning to the B&M exclusive releases. But until then, stay safe, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.